Hey, Scott Jordan here for Jancast number 219 for August 13th, 2026. And we're coming up to the end of August. That means Labor Day. And next thing you know, it'll be snowing. So get ready for a winter rinse and liquid ice melt. Okay, so those of you who've been following Jancast for a while, pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, we were pretty open and transparent with everything that was going on with supply chain issues, pricing, all that stuff. So we've held off for the last 2.5 years on putting through a general price increase for our brands as well as individual private label products that we make for various customers. And we've done a lot of stuff which my AI assistant is going to outline as to how we were able to hold off on a price increase for 2.5 years and still maintain good quality and everything that you're used to with the Bullen companies and our products that we manufacture. So we did a bunch of different things, but if you want to know what the price increase was, hit me up, shoot me an email, and I'd be glad to pass it on to you. I don't want to make it too easy for our competition, but fortunately, we have a couple companies in the Philadelphia market that actually publish price increases from various suppliers. So I can say that our increase was probably a little on the lower side compared to some of the competition of similar products. So sorry we had to do this, but I think under the circumstances, 2.5 years is a pretty long time under all the stuff that's gone on since 2.5 years ago. It certainly has gotten dramatically worse most recently, but you'll see, the AI system gives an excellent video overview. So I appreciate you working with us and bearing with us on this, hopefully a price increase that we'll be able to roll back at some point. Some of the raw material costs are at least stabilizing for now, but as we all know, we're not sure if the excursion/war is over, not over, or whatever. So I don't see any resolution from a raw material standpoint anytime soon, but at least we're trying to keep it under control as much as possible. Thanks a lot, and I hope you enjoy the AI overview.
Let's dive right into today's explainer. We're looking at an outside perspective on why manufacturers, like Bullen, eventually have to raise their prices. You know that feeling when you're walking down an aisle, you see a new, much higher price tag on a product you buy all the time, and you just think, how on earth did they come up with that number? Well, it's really easy for us to assume those hikes are just arbitrary pushes for more profit. But today, we're going to look at the cold, hard data from a recent manufacturing case study featured in Jancast episode 219. We're going to break down the absolute gauntlet of costs a product has to survive before it ever even reaches your shelf.
So, to start uncovering this unseen battle, we have to ask ourselves what truly happens behind the scenes before a company finally throws in the towel and decides a price tag has to go up. Do they just pull a lever the second materials get a tiny bit more expensive, or is there this massive hidden struggle that the public completely misses? Well, as we look at the data from Bullen, which is a chemical manufacturer dealing with some pretty severe supply chain pressures, we find a story that's not about quick reactions at all. It's actually about deep, deep resistance.
Just listen to this quote. They said, "We didn't wake up one morning and decide to raise prices. We spent 2.5 years trying not to." That completely lays bare Bullen's grueling fight to resist price hikes. It proves this is literally never a sudden or arbitrary decision. Just think about that for a second. For 30 whole months, while the broader economy was shifting and global supply chains were completely fracturing, this manufacturer was actively absorbing the hits. They were basically acting as a shock absorber for the consumer, finding absolutely every possible way to make the math work internally before asking you to pay a single penny more.
Okay, let's move into our first phase here, exhausting the alternatives and the behind-the-scenes cost-saving measures.
About 1.5 years ago, Bullen survived by totally switching up their tactics. So instead of using those pristine, white-treated boxes, which, looked great but cost a serious premium, they downgraded to standard brown cardboard. They kept the exact same structural integrity, just at a much lower price point. On top of that, they aggressively used their available cash reserves to buy commodity items, things like caps and triggers, in massive bulk quantities. Basically, if caps and trigger sprayers were available, they didn't just buy what they needed for that month, they bought a ton of them up front to lock in a lower unit price and hold off an immediate price hike for the consumer.
Let's look at the supply chain flow next and follow a drop of raw material.
To really grasp the pressure here, you have to realize a product faces a gauntlet of costs at every single stage. It picks up new expenses from the raw materials all the way down to the final freight delivery. It is never just the liquid inside the bottle that matters. First, it's the raw chemical materials, then the plastic bottle itself, then the specialized cap or sprayer, then you've got to print the label, put those bottles into a corrugated box, physically manufacture the product, load those boxes onto wooden pallets, and finally, secure the freight just to move the whole shebang. If costs rise in just one of these 6 steps, a manufacturer feels it. But what happens when costs go up in all of them at the exact same time?
That brings us to the anatomy of a gallon, which is essentially death by 1,000 cuts.
When you break down a standard 4-pack case of 1-gallon bottles, you can see how these tiny, unseen increases rapidly compound. 30 cents more for a bottle seems totally trivial, right? 10 cents for a box, barely noticeable. Even 3 cents for a label feels like absolute pennies. But when you multiply that by 4 bottles per case, suddenly the packaging alone is costing the manufacturer an extra $1.72 every single time a box rolls off the line. Over tens of thousands of cases, that becomes a completely unsustainable hemorrhage of cash.
But here is the absolute kicker. That $1.72 increase only accounts for the packaging. It leaves the rising costs of the raw materials completely unaccounted for. No joke, that math we just looked at is literally just the plastic, the cardboard, and the stickers. It doesn't even touch the actual chemical solution inside the bottle. The raw materials used to make the actual product are spiking at the exact same time, adding this whole secondary layer of extreme financial pressure that isn't even reflected in that packaging breakdown we just did.
Let's shift over to the invisible anchors, those hidden operational costs.
Beyond the physical stuff, freight acts as this brutal double-edged sword. The manufacturer absorbs the brunt of incoming fuel surcharges, and then you, the customer, inevitably get hit on the delivery end. When fuel prices spike, logistics companies immediately tack on fuel surcharges. So Bolin gets hit with these massive fees just to get their raw materials and empty bottles delivered to their own facility. They pay that premium just to keep the lights on. And then, unfortunately, when the finished product ships out, those outgoing freight charges are ultimately felt by you. It's this vicious cycle where logistics just eat right into everyone's bottom line. Now add that massive freight burden to the top of this staggering number, a 17% spike in general employee medical costs. This is a great reminder that manufacturers are also human employers dealing with real-world healthcare expenses. It's so easy to view a manufacturer as just some giant, faceless machine pumping out plastic bottles, right? But they are employers with dedicated staff. A 17% increase in medical costs is a massive overhead expense that has absolutely nothing to do with cardboard or chemicals, but it impacts the bottom line profoundly. Absorbing a cost jump that large while also eating packaging and freight hikes is exactly why holding off on price increases for 2.5 years was such a Herculean effort.
Eventually, we hit the breaking points and the true cost of instability.
Ultimately, the cumulative weight of all of this forces a manufacturer's hand, and it really boils down to this quote: "It is not the increases that hurt, but the instability of not knowing what is coming." A business can plan for a standard, expected increase. They can budget for a 3 or 5% bump in materials over a year. What they absolutely cannot plan for is waking up on a Tuesday to find out caps are suddenly up 40%, or freight surcharges have literally doubled overnight. It's that constant, unpredictable volatility in the modern supply chain that pushes them to that breaking point, requiring them to raise prices just to ensure the company survives the next unforeseen shock. So the next time you see a price jump at the store, just remember the 30 cents here, the 10 cents there, the incoming freight surcharges, and the 2.5 years of behind-the-scenes battling that likely took place before that new sticker was ever even printed. As we wrap up this explainer, I'll leave you with one final question. When supply chains remain this unpredictable, what invisible costs are quietly building up inside the products you buy every day?